Shark 4467, wind 200 at 10, runway 31 left at Kilo Echo, clear for takeoff.
Titanic, the most famous ship in history. Few would try to take that title from her. 108 years ago, Titanic went down. 108 years. So much has happened in the 108 years since the Great White Star liner sank in the North Atlantic. World War I started just 2 years later in 1914. A year into the war, another great liner, the Lusitania, was torpedoed by a German submarine, killing 1,200 people. The Spanish flu spread across the world and killed 50 million people in the middle of a war that killed 40 million people. Not long after, a worldwide economic collapse turned the world upside down, only to be forgotten when authoritarian regimes plunged all of humanity into the deadliest period it had ever experienced. Atomic bombs fell, leaders assassinated, the moon walked upon, and conflict persisted the whole way. All of this happened, but we still remember, vividly, the sinking of a big, but otherwise unimportant passenger ship more than a century later. But why? No one person can answer this question definitively, but I'll give you my take. We remember Titanic because, by sheer happenstance, the sinking of Titanic unfolded like a Greek tragedy. There are many elements of a Greek tragedy, but the most important are as follows. The presence of a tragic hero. This character is a good, but flawed person who, due to their flaws, the audience can relate to. Catharsis resulting from the actions of the tragic hero, and a moral lesson. The real story of Titanic has all of these elements. The tragic hero was the whole of Edwardian society, embodied by Captain Edward J. Smith, who had a long and honorable maritime career, was ever popular among the ruling class passengers his ships carried, and believed, quote, modern shipbuilding has gone beyond ships able to founder. Catharsis commences when Titanic strikes an iceberg in the North Atlantic. The ship, well built no doubt, sinks slowly, allowing her passengers to transition from a state of ignorance to denial to panic over the course of 2.5 hours. Had Titanic sank quickly, like Atlantic, Lusitania, Empress of Ireland, and others, the dramatic events and subplots that make Titanic famous could not have occurred, and the full effect of the sinking would not have been realized. Many passengers and crew aboard the great liner were thwarted with the moral lesson of Titanic. Those reading and watching the story unfold in books and movies years later see the lesson in real time, but the world and society learned the lesson in the days, weeks, and months that followed. Man was not infallible. Society had not reached its peak. Perhaps it would never reach its peak. Injustice reigned, existential threats loomed, and challenges persisted. People could starve, disease could still spread, and yes, ships could still sink. If the structural elements were not enough, the Titanic story brought the classic Greek tragedy to sea, aboard an unbelievably grand liner. To top it all off, fate would mix in all the devices of a great novel to ensure that the story was as compelling as possible. The foreshadowing of Titanic's near miss with the SS New York while leaving Southampton, the irony of the grandest ship in the world sinking on her maiden voyage, the ship's symbolism of the Edwardian era and the Gilded Age. Titanic herself was a microcosm of society, barreling toward disaster. The ship was divided into classes, with little to no overlap. Those in first class enjoyed grandeur and luxury, and only saw those in third class when they looked down from the lofty promenade decks above. Technology and standards were improving, so the third class experienced more space, better hygiene, tastier food than in the past, but inequality persisted, and they knew more of Titanic's luxury from advertisements than from first-hand experience despite being on board themselves. The ship's officers governed and guided the ship while an army of firemen below battled the heat and exhaustion to keep up the steam. When the ship struck an iceberg and began to slowly sink, drama and suspense ensued. Gallant officers ordered women and children into the lifeboats. Some listened, others denied that the ship was sinking beneath their feet. Engineers stayed below and kept the lights on for as long as possible. Ida Strauss would not board a lifeboat without her husband, and they perished together. The band played to delay the panic and prolong the civility of a sinking society. Thomas Andrews, one of Titanic's designers, went down with his ship. Captain Smith came to terms with the death that would occur on his watch, his last watch, before an honorable retirement from a glorious career. The villainous Bruce Ismay, one of the men who allowed Titanic to sail without enough lifeboats, ironically escaped in one of those lifeboats. Within sight, the tramp steamer SS Californian watched Titanic cry for help, then founder, but did nothing. Another small ship raced at her own peril through ice-ridden waters to Titanic's location. Captain Arthur Rostron of the Little Carpathia pulled out all the stops and inspired his crew to do all they possibly could. Soon, the survivors of the largest ship in the world were saved by the likes of the modest Carpathia, and the remnants of society were stunned when this single-funneled ship arrived in New York instead of the awe-inspiring Titanic. This same society would come to realize that it had not figured it all out. Titanic was a prelude to the chaos and uncertainty that was coming for them.